My name is Eleanor Vance, and at my grandfather's funeral reception, my uncle destroyed my life. I was supposed to inherit Vance Publishing, the literary legacy Arthur Vance built over 50 years. Instead, my uncle Marcus presented a fraudulent will, claiming Arthur left him everything moments before his death. I was helpless. He was the CFO with control of the accounts, and the new will was legally notarized while my grandfather was heavily medicated. Marcus's motive was simple: to sell the company's valuable real estate and liquidate its assets to cover a crime I didn't yet know he had committed. As he had security escort me out of the building, he made one arrogant mistake. He let me keep my purse, and inside it was a cryptic parting gift from my grandfather that he had overlooked. My grandfather, Arthur Vance, was more than just family. He was my mentor, my hero, and the only person who understood my soul. He hadn't just built a publishing house, he had built a sanctuary for words. While other companies chased fleeting bestsellers, Vance Publishing curated careers and protected literary heritage. He was born from humble beginnings, starting with a single printing press in a dusty basement, and through sheer will and an unerring eye for talent, he built an empire that spanned continents. From my earliest memories, Arthur and I shared a bond forged in ink and paper. While my parents, consumed by their own shallow social lives, were happy to pawn me off, my grandfather saw me. He didn't take me to parks. He took me to his office. He wouldn't read me children's stories. He'd read me manuscripts from authors he was considering, asking my opinion even when I was just 10 years old. "The key to this business, Ellie," he'd say, his eyes twinkling behind his glasses, "isn't just finding what sells. It's finding what lasts." During my summer breaks, I didn't go to camp. I interned in the archives. A vast, temperature-controlled room in the basement that smelled of old paper and history. I learned the intricacies of bookbinding, copyright law, and manuscript preservation. By the time I was 20, I could spot a first edition forgery from 10 paces away. The staff, many of whom had been with Arthur for decades, I would smile when I walked by, calling me the young curator. At night, we'd sit in his library, a magnificent room with floor-to-ceiling shelves, and he would teach me the business. "One day, all this will be yours, Ellie," he'd gesture, "not just to the books, but to the legacy. Not because you are my blood, but because you have earned it. You have the soul for it." I believed him. He had never broken a promise. My family dynamic was, to put it mildly, strained. My uncle, Marcus Vance, was the chief financial officer. He was a man who understood numbers but not value. He saw Vance Publishing not as a cultural institution, but as a collection of assets. I saw the resentment in his eyes every time Arthur praised my insights. Marcus had worked in his brother's shadow for 30 years, and he seethed with a quiet, bitter envy. His wife, my Aunt Cynthia, was a frivolous woman dedicated to spending Marcus's generous salary. And then there was my cousin, Chloe, 4 years younger than me. She had never worked a day in her life. Her entire identity wrapped up in her social media following and her next luxury purchase. While I was studying contract law, she was mastering the art of the perfect selfie. They were, in my grandfather's private words, beautifully bound, but utterly empty books. I channeled all my energy into making Arthur proud. I graduated top of my class with a dual degree in literature and business administration, and immediately took the full-time role he created for me, chief archivist and head of legacy preservation. By 30, I was effectively his right hand, sitting in on executive meetings, scouting for new talent, and managing the company's priceless backlist, its true financial and cultural core. The employees respected me because they knew I had earned my place. Starting from the dusty basement archives and working my way up, the only shadow was the growing tension with Marcus. As Arthur gave me more executive responsibilities, my uncle became openly hostile. "Ellie, your projections for the poetry division are... Quin." He would sneer in board meetings. "But this is a business, not your personal library. We need to cut these sentimental projects. The poetry division builds our prestige. Marcus, I would reply calmly, which attracts the prize-winning authors who do drive our profits. It's all connected. We'll see what Arthur thinks, he would say, knowing full well Arthur had already approved my plan. Chloe would just sit there, texting under the table, completely bored by the entire affair. I didn't care. As long as I had Arthur's support and the promise of the company, I could withstand their pettiness. It all changed 3 months ago. It started with a phone call. Arthur had collapsed at his desk. A massive heart attack. I rushed to the hospital, my blood running cold. He survived the initial event, but the prognosis was grim. The doctors, in hushed tones, spoke of complications, of cognitive decline, of making him comfortable. My invincible grandfather, the titan of the literary world, was fading. The first time I saw him after, his voice was a weak tremor. Ellie. He gripped my hand, his strength surprising. Things are complicated. Trust what I've built for you. Remember the archives. Before I could ask what he meant, my Aunt Cynthia bustled in. The doctor said no stress. Dear, let's let your grandfather rest. Over the next few weeks, I practically lived at the hospital, trying to run the company from a laptop in the waiting room. But my access to Arthur became increasingly restricted. This was the first stage of their coup. He's sleeping, Cynthia would say, blocking the doorway with her body, her smile tight and false. I could hear him coughing inside. The doctor said family only right now, Marcus would tell me later, his tone slick with false concern. He's just so confused. We don't want to overwhelm him. He was conveniently forgetting that I was as much his family as he was. I caught glimpses of lawyers I didn't recognize leaving his room, their briefcases snapping shut. When I questioned Marcus, he was dismissive. Just updating some corporate bylaws. Eleanor. Standard procedure. He's worried about the estate tax implications. Don't you worry your pretty head about it. The condescension was a physical thing, like a greasy film. I knew something was deeply wrong. I tried to argue with the nurses, but they just shook their heads. Mr. Vance's wife and brother are his medical proxies now. Dear. Our hands are tied. They had isolated him completely. In his last lucid moment, when Cynthia was down in the cafeteria, I slipped past a nurse. He was frail, a shadow of the man who had built an empire. He pulled me close. The smell of antiseptic sharp in the air. My pen. Ellie, he whispered, his eyes unfocused but urgent. My favorite. It holds the key. Protect my legacy. Don't let them. His eyes rolled back. I promised I would, though I didn't understand. I kissed his forehead. It was the last time I saw him alive. 2 days later, he slipped into a coma. A week after that, he was gone. The funeral was a blur of black suits and hushed condolences from the literary world. I was shattered, but my grief was overshadowed by a cold, sharp anxiety. Marcus, now the picture of the grieving brother, insisted on holding the will reading immediately after. In the main conference room at Vance Publishing, best to get the formalities over with, he said, putting a comforting arm around Chloe, who looked tragically beautiful in a black designer dress. The conference room felt cold. The lawyer, the same man I had seen rushing from Arthur's hospital room, cleared his throat. I, Arthur Vance, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all previous wills and testaments. My head snapped up. Revoke Arthur had shown me his will years ago. It was ironclad. I was his successor. The lawyer continued reading, his voice a monotone drone that seemed to come from a great distance. The room began to tilt. The new will, dated just 2 weeks ago when Arthur was heavily medicated and I was barred from his room, was a complete betrayal. The entirety of his estate, his personal fortune, and his controlling shares in Vance Publishing were bequeathed to his granddaughter. Chloe. I felt the air leave my lungs. Chloe. She didn't even read. Furthermore, the lawyer read on, my brother, Marcus Vance, will serve as interim CEO and executor of the estate, until such time as Chloe is prepared to assume leadership. Mr. Vance is granted full authority to make any and all executive decisions regarding the company's assets, including restructuring or liquidation. Liquidation. The word hung in the air like poison gas. He was going to sell it. Sell the legacy. The archives. Everything. This is wrong, I said, my voice shaking. This isn't what he wanted. He was sick. He was being manipulated. He wasn't of sound mind. Your grandfather made his wishes perfectly clear. Eleanor, my Aunt Cynthia said, dabbing at a dry eye. He finally recognized who was truly loyal. Loyal or just opportunistic, I shot back, looking at Marcus. Marcus's face remained a mask of calm sorrow. Your grandfather had a change of heart. Eleanor, he was worried you were too sentimental, that you'd run the company into the ground with your legacy projects. He wanted someone with a plus, modern perspective. He gestured to Chloe, who was examining her manicure. To my granddaughter, Eleanor, the lawyer finished. I leave my personal effects and my gratitude for her service. He slid a small, sealed envelope across the table. I stared at it, my hands numb. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute. It was almost surreal. Back at the reception, held in the company's grand lobby, the mood was somber. I was standing by the archive display, a permanent exhibit I had curated. My heart, a cold stone in my chest. When Marcus tapped the microphone, friends, colleagues, authors, thank you for coming to honor my brother. He gave a flawless performance of a grieving leader. Arthur's passing leaves a great void, but he made his wishes for the company's future very clear. As the new CEO, I must immediately begin the difficult process of restructuring. A murmur went through the crowd. We must be agile. We must trim the fat. The parts of the business that are no longer profitable, that are holding us back. His eyes found mine across the room. A small, triumphant smile played on his lips. This was his stage. This was his public reversal. To that end, our legacy division and the position of chief archivist are, unfortunately, redundant, effective immediately. Gasps rippled through the room. Longtime editors looked at me in horror. It was a public execution. Eleanor. Marcus continued, his voice dripping with false sympathy. Your employment with Vance Publishing is terminated. Security. That's unnecessary, I said, my voice surprisingly clear and cold. I could feel every eye in the room on me. I felt the humiliation, the boiling rage, but I remembered Arthur's voice. Keep calm in a crisis. Ellie, the first to anger is the first to lose. I would not give him the satisfaction of a scene. I picked up my purse. I walked straight up to him, stopping just a foot away. The entire lobby was silent. I understand, Mr. CEO, I said, my voice low but steady. I hope you can manage the legacy you've just inherited. I turned, and without looking back, walked through the lobby, past the shocked faces of my colleagues, and out the grand oak doors that Arthur and I had walked through together countless times. The doors clicked shut behind me, sealing me off from my entire life, my home, and my legacy. I stood on the cold pavement, alone, with nothing but my purse and a cold, clarifying fury. They thought they had won. They had no idea what Arthur Vance had truly left me. I didn't cry. Crying was a luxury I couldn't afford, a weakness I would not indulge. The public humiliation, the feeling of every eye in that lobby on my back as I was cast out, had frozen the grief in my veins. It had turned into a solid, cold core of anger. I walked 10 blocks, the sharp click of my expensive heels on the dirty pavement, the only sound accompanying my thoughts. I found a cheap motel on the edge of town, the kind with a flickering neon sign that advertised hourly rates. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and despair. I sat on the lumpy mattress under a single, buzzing fluorescent light. This was my new reality. I pulled out my phone. The first notification, your corporate credit card has been declined. The second, your corporate account has been frozen. The third, from my company email, was simple. Access denied. Marcus wasn't just fast, he was thorough. He wanted me erased. I knew I had 24 hours, maybe 48, in my company-leased apartment before the locks were changed. I was homeless, jobless, and completely, utterly isolated. This was, by any objective measure, my lowest point, but I felt no despair, only that sharp, focused rage. Marcus thought he had cut me out. He thought I was like him, motivated by money and status. He was a fool. I was motivated by legacy, and that was a fortress he couldn't breach. I opened my purse and dumped the contents onto the stained polyester bedspread. Wallet, keys, phone, a paperback I was reading, and the small, sealed envelope the lawyer had slid across the table. The gratitude for my service. My hands were steady as I tore it open. Inside was not a letter, but a small, velvet-covered box, the kind used for jewelry. I opened it. Nestled on the black velvet was an old fountain pen. It was a vintage silver model, one I recognized instantly. It was Arthur's favorite, the one he'd used to sign his first major author contract, the one he kept on his desk for decades. But as I looked closer, I saw it was also visibly broken. A small, hairline crack ran down the nib housing. He hadn't used it in years. I stared at it. A broken pen. Was this a final, petty insult from Marcus? A symbol of the broken company he was leaving me? No. This wasn't from Marcus. This was from Arthur. His words from the hospital room, whispered and urgent, flashed in my mind. My pen. Ellie. It holds the key. Protect my legacy. It wasn't a metaphor. It was a literal instruction. I picked up the pen, the cool metal heavy in my hand. A memory, sharp and clear, surfaced from deep within my archivist's mind. It was from 15 years ago. Arthur had taken me down to the main archives, his hand on my shoulder. He had led me to the back wall, the one lined with unassuming, faux 19th century literary journals. The main warehouse. Ellie, he had explained, his voice echoing slightly in the cool, dry air, is for inventory. That's Marcus's domain. He sees the quantity of books. But this? He pushed aside a heavy oak bookshelf, revealing a heavy, seamless steel door. This is our soul. This is where we keep the value. He called it the Legacy Vault. It was a small, fireproof, climate-controlled room. It was where he kept the truly priceless items original. Handwritten manuscripts from legendary authors. His very first signed contracts. His private letters. The soul needs a special kind of protection, he'd said. He showed me the lock. It wasn't a keypad or a card scanner, which he claimed could be hacked, duplicated, or forced. It was a unique, analog, custom-made mechanism. And the key was this exact fountain pen. The cap, when removed and inserted into a hidden, brass-lined slot, engaged a series of internal tumblers that only its specific shape and weight could trigger. The best security. My dear, he'd said, his eyes crinkling at the corners, isn't a complex system. It's a simple one that no one else knows exists. Values aren't secured by locks. Ellie, they're secured by knowledge. My heart was pounding in the cheap motel room. Marcus, the CFO, knew all about the main warehouse inventory, the assets he was so eager to sell. He knew the numbers. But he didn't know the knowledge. He didn't know about the legacy vault. He was an arrogant fool, blinded by his own greed. And his arrogance was the opening I needed. My phone buzzed again. The notification from the building's security system. Building access credentials revoked. My heart sank. Of course. Marcus was thorough. But wait. That was an automated email from the HR system he controlled. Was it true? Or was it just another part of the public humiliation? Meant to tell me I was locked out. To make me feel defeated. In his haste to seize the CEO chair and get the liquidation rolling. Had he actually processed the physical termination with the third-party security company, or did he just cut my email and payroll? He was arrogant. He thought I was a sentimental fool who would be at home, crying, defeated. He wouldn't expect me to come back. It was a bet I had to take. I waited until 2:00 a.m. The city was quiet. I stood across the street from the Vance Publishing building. A black baseball cap pulled low. My heart hammering in my throat. The lobby was dark, save for the single desk lamp where the overnight guard was. As I knew he always was. Asleep in his chair. I walked to the employee entrance in the side alley. I took a deep breath. I held my company keycard to the sensor. I braced for the angry red light. The denied buzz. Instead, a soft, beautiful click echoed in the alley, followed by the green flash of the indicator light. He was an idiot. His arrogance had left the door open. I slipped inside, my footsteps silent on the marble. The building was eerie in the dark, a mausoleum of my own life. I avoided the main elevators and took the stairs down to the basement, to the archives, my office, my sanctuary. The air was cool and smelled of paper and history. I walked past the rows of rolling stacks, my hand brushing against the spines of books I had personally catalogued. I reached the back wall, the one lined with the faux journals. I found the right book, a worn copy of Moby Dick, and pulled it. The section of shelving swung inward with a faint whoosh, revealing the heavy steel door of the legacy vault. My hand was shaking now, not from fear, but from anticipation. I took the pen from my pocket. I removed the cap, inserted it into the discreet, brass-lined slot. I turned it clockwise. With a heavy, satisfying thud of oiled bolts retracting, the door unsealed. I pulled it open. Inside, the air was perfectly still. This was Arthur's true office. And there, placed squarely in the center of his small personal desk, was a thick, leather-bound volume and a stack of manila folders. They were not archives. They were weapons. I opened the first folder. My breath caught. It was Arthur's original will, meticulously drafted by his lifelong attorney and notarized 5 years prior. It stated, in clear, ironclad language, that I, Eleanor Vance, was to be his sole successor, inheriting his controlling shares and the title of CEO, with the express mandate to protect the company's legacy above all profit. The document Marcus had read was a complete fabrication, forced on a dying man. This was the proof I needed to fight the will. But the second set of documents, this explained why. I opened the leather-bound volume. It was a secret ledger, kept in Arthur's own precise, elegant handwriting. For the past 8 years, Marcus had been systematically stealing from the company. Not by embezzling cash, which as CFO he could have hidden, but by stealing the assets themselves. He had been taking priceless first editions, a signed Hemingway, an original manuscript of a Pulitzer winner, a Shakespeare folio from this very vault, replacing them with near-perfect forgeries, and then selling the originals on the black market for millions. The ledgers detailed every single theft, the date, the book, and the estimated value. I sank into Arthur's chair, the room spinning. This was why Marcus needed to liquidate the company. It wasn't just greed for the inheritance. It was a cover-up. He needed to sell the building and destroy the archives, burying the evidence of his crimes, the forgeries he had planted before anyone else, especially me, the chief archivist, could ever discover them. He had to get me out, and he had to do it fast. He hadn't just stolen my inheritance. He had been robbing my grandfather blind for years, and he had used his brother's dying moments to frame me and seize control, all to hide his own pathetic, desperate crimes. The cold fury in my chest turned into white-hot purpose. He thought he had left me with nothing. He had no idea Arthur had left me with everything. I sat in Arthur's chair in the vault, the leather cool against my skin. The original will was enough to challenge Marcus in probate court, a long, messy, public battle that could drag on for years. The ledgers were enough to send him to prison for theft, but a public scandal and a prison sentence for the CEO would still destroy Vance Publishing. Arthur's legacy would be defined by his brother's crimes. I knew my grandfather. He was meticulous. He was a chess player. This wasn't the whole plan. My eyes scanned the small desk. The will and the ledgers had been placed squarely in the center, but tucked to the side, almost as an afterthought, was a third manila folder. It was thicker than the others. The label on it read simply, Vance Legacy Trust. I opened it. My heart, which had been pounding with vindictive anger, suddenly went still. This was not a supplement. This was the true weapon. It was a stack of complex legal documents, articles of incorporation, and trust agreements. But I had spent a decade studying contract law alongside literature. I understood what I was looking at instantly. Arthur wasn't just a sentimentalist. He was a brilliant, ruthless strategist. He had seen this coming, not just for weeks, but for years. He knew Marcus was a thief, but he also knew that proving it in court would be messy and could destroy the company's reputation, the very thing Marcus was counting on. So, he had built a failsafe. Years ago, he had quietly and legally created a separate entity, a nonprofit organization called the Vance Legacy Trust. Its stated mission was to preserve and promote the literary works curated by Arthur Vance. And then, piece by piece, he had legally transferred the most valuable assets of the company, not the physical books which Marcus was stealing, not the building, not the printing presses, but the publishing rights and intellectual property of the company's entire backlist, into this trust. The Vance Publishing Company, the entity Marcus now controlled, was just the operational arm. It was a shell. The trust was the brain and the soul. I fumbled for the original will, the one from 5 years ago. I scanned the lines again. It was brilliant. It was subtle. Arthur didn't leave the company the shell to me. He left the presidency and sole directorship of the Vance Legacy Trust to me. My mind was racing, connecting the dots with a speed that left me breathless. What did this mean? It meant the fraudulent will Marcus had created was meaningless. He had gone through all that effort, manipulating a dying man, bribing a new lawyer, staging a public coup, to inherit nothing. He had legally forced Arthur to leave him. An empty box, a building he would now have to pay property tax on, office furniture, a warehouse full of paper. But he did not own the right to print the words on that paper. This was the ultimate poetic justice. Marcus, the man who only saw physical assets, the man who sneered at sentimental legacy, had been left with only the physical assets. Arthur had ensured that was all he could get. I didn't celebrate. I planned. I couldn't just reveal this. I needed to trap him. His goal was liquidation. My goal was to let him walk right into that trap, publicly and definitively. I found the vault's old copy machine. I spent the next hour meticulously, calmly, copying every page of the ledgers, the original will, and the complete trust documents. I left the originals exactly as I had found them, placed the pen back on the desk, and sealed the vault. I slipped out of the building just as the first hint of gray dawn was breaking over the city. I was an archivist. I knew how to preserve evidence. The next morning, I looked up Daniel Reeves. He was a litigator Arthur had always respected. He's a shark, Arthur once told me, smiling. But he's our shark. He understands that in business, you don't fight for what's fair. You fight for what's yours. I used the last of my cash to pay for a consultation. I didn't cry or plead. I walked into his gleaming downtown office, sat down, and placed the stack of copied documents on his desk. He reviewed them in silence, his expression shifting from neutral curiosity to a sharp, focused interest. When he finished the trust documents, he let out a low whistle and looked up at me. This is surgical, Daniel said, a slow smile spreading across his face. Your grandfather was a very, very smart man. Marcus is calling a board meeting, I said, my voice perfectly level. He's trying to liquidate the company. He's bringing in real estate developers. Of course he is, Daniel said, tapping the copy of the forgery ledger. He's destroying the evidence of his own crimes. He thinks he's selling the whole library. He doesn't realize he's just selling the bookshelves. This is the most arrogant, stupidly brilliant criminal I've ever seen. So, what's the plan? I asked. The plan, Daniel leaned back, steepling his fingers. We let him get every board member, every investor, every partner in that room. We let him publicly declare the company's value. We let him sign the sale papers. And then, we pull the rug out from under him. We execute the will. This was good, but it wasn't enough. I wanted Marcus to lose everything, including his allies. I need one more thing, I said. I need to isolate him. That evening, I did the harder part. I needed to turn his own golden child against him. I found my cousin Chloe on Instagram. As I expected, she was already posting about her new CEO vibes, posing in Arthur's office, sitting in his chair, a glass of champagne in her hand. The caption read, "Stepping into my new role. Big changes coming." She was arrogant, blasé, and utterly predictable. I sent her a message from a new, anonymous email account. You're the new owner. Congratulations. Are you sure you know what your father is really doing? She replied almost instantly. Who is this? My father is saving the company. Is he, I wrote back, or is he selling it out from under you? He's telling investors the company is worthless because you're the heir. He's using your lack of experience to justify a fire sale. He's not saving it for you. He's cashing it out before you can even see the bank accounts. Ask him what the real valuation of the backlist is. See if he'll tell you. I logged out. I knew Chloe. She was deeply vain. The idea that her father was telling people she was incompetent. That would sting more than the theft. She didn't care about the legacy, but she cared deeply about her image. I had just planted the seed. She was a pawn, and I was about to turn her against her own king. The trap was set. Now, I just needed Marcus to spring it. As Daniel predicted, it didn't take long. 2 days later, I got a call from a sympathetic editor still inside the company, a woman who had worked with Arthur for 30 years. Eleanor, it's happening, she whispered, her voice frantic. Marcus just called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. 10 a.m. He's bringing in investors. Some real estate group. He's going to push through the liquidation. He's claiming the company is hemorrhaging money, and this is the only way. Thank you, Mary, I said, my voice calm. Don't worry. I hung up and called Daniel. He's done it. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Perfect. Daniel's voice was sharp. Let's go to a funeral. Marcus was speeding. He was desperate to erase his crimes. He was running so fast he didn't even see the cliff Arthur had built for him. Tomorrow, I wouldn't just be reclaiming my company. I would be executing my grandfather's final, brilliant move. The morning of the board meeting was crisp and bright. I dressed with deliberate care. I had spent the last of my emergency cash on a new suit, not a flashy one, but a simple, impeccably tailored sheath dress in a dark navy blue. It was the armor I deserved. When I met Daniel in the lobby of his building, he gave me an appreciative nod. You look like a CEO. Ms. Vance. That's the idea, I said. We took a cab to the Vance Publishing building, the building I had been thrown out of just days before. As we approached, I felt nothing, no fear, no sadness, just a cold, sharp focus. I was an executioner arriving for a scheduled appointment. We walked into the main lobby. The receptionist, a young woman Marcus had hired, looked up. May I help you? We're here for the 10 a.m. board meeting, Daniel said smoothly, stepping in front of me. I'm sorry. Sir, that's a private meeting. Are you an investor? I am legal counsel for the primary stakeholder, Daniel replied, not missing a beat. Before she could question that, the elevator doors opened, and two men in expensive suits, the real estate developers, walked out, chatting animatedly with my Aunt Cynthia. Cynthia, seeing me, froze. Her face, plastered with makeup, went pale. You, she hissed, her voice trembling. You are not allowed in this building. I'll call security. Good morning, Cynthia, I said, my voice pleasant. You look lovely. Is Marcus already upstairs? We wouldn't want to be late. He brushed past her, Daniel at my side, and stepped into the elevator. Herr sputtering. Outraged sounds were cut off as the doors slid shut. She'll be calling him right now, Danielle noted. Good, I replied. Let him sweat. The elevator opened onto the executive floor. The boardroom door was closed, but I could hear Marcus's booming voice. We stood outside for a moment, listening. And so, with the company's unfortunate debt load and declining profitability, Marcus was saying, his voice slick with false regret, the only responsible path forward is to accept this generous offer from Apex Realty. They are offering $30 million for the building and all associated assets. A clean break. It's what my brother, in his final days, knew was necessary. I nodded to Daniel. He pushed the door open. The room went silent. Every head snapped toward us. Marcus was at the head of the table, his face flushed with self-importance. Chloe was beside him, looking bored and scrolling through her phone. The board members, men and women who had known me for years, looked stunned. Marcus's face went from shock to a dark, apoplectic red. What is the meaning of this? He bellowed, slamming his hand on the table. Security. Get her out of here, she is trespassing. Sight down. Marcus, Daniel Reeves said, his voice cutting through the room like a razor. We are here on official business. You have no business here, Marcus shouted, his composure cracking, his eyes wide with panic. This is a private meeting. It is, I said, walking calmly to the other end of the table. I felt a strange sense of peace. This was my room. I had earned it. And as the actual majority stakeholder of this company's assets, I believe I was invited. You own nothing, he shrieked. The will was read. You were left nothing. Yes. The will, Daniel said. He placed his briefcase on the table and began distributing folders to the shocked board members. The one you had a dying, heavily medicated man sign. The one you conveniently had notarized by a lawyer you hired just for the occasion. We've already filed a petition to contest that document on the grounds of elder abuse, lack of capacity, and undue influence. But honestly, it's irrelevant. Marcus laughed. A high-pitched, nervous sound. Irrelevant. It's everything. No, it's not, I said quietly. The room was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning. You see, Uncle, you inherited a company. But you failed to ask a very important question. What does the company own? Chloe finally looked up from her phone. A flicker of confusion and the seed of suspicion I had planted in her eyes. It owns this building, the inventory, the presses, Marcus sputtered. Correct, Daniel said, nodding. It owns the bookshelves. It just doesn't own the books. Daniel tapped his folder. Inside, you will all find the Articles of Incorporation for the Vance Legacy Trust, a nonprofit entity founded by Arthur Vance 6 years ago. You will also find contracts, signed and executed, transferring the complete intellectual property, publishing rights, and all backlist contracts of Vance Publishing into that trust. The two real estate developers stared at the papers, their faces turning to stone. In short, I explained, Vance Publishing, the company you are so eager to liquidate, is a shell. It's an empty box. It has no assets of value, save this building, which, as I'm sure the board knows, is currently leveraged with a massive mortgage that Marcus himself took out last year. One of the board members, an older man named Walter, looked at Marcus, his face pale. Marcus, is this true? It's a lie, a fabrication. Marcus was sweating, his eyes darting around the room. It's all on public record, Daniel said calmly. Which brings us to the original, valid will of Arthur Vance. He slid a final document onto the table, which leaves 100% control, presidency, and directorship of the Vance Legacy Trust. To Eleanor Vance. The developers stood up abruptly. You wasted our time. One of them snapped at Marcus. You tried to sell us a property you don't own the rights to. We're out. They stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind them. The room was in chaos. Board members were shouting. Marcus was backed against the wall, his face ashen. You can't do this, he whispered, his voice hoarse. It's not. It's not. But why? Marcus, I asked, my voice cutting through the noise. Why go to all this trouble? Why force a dying man to sign a fake will? Just to inherit an empty box. Unless you didn't know it was empty. I stepped forward. Or unless you weren't trying to gain an inheritance. You were trying to destroy evidence. I slid the final set of documents onto the table. The copies of Arthur's ledgers. These, I said, are my grandfather's private ledgers. They detail the systematic theft of over $10 million in priceless first editions and original manuscripts from the Legacy Vault. Stolen by you, Marcus, over the last 8 years, replaced with forgeries. Walter, the board member, gasped. Me God, Marcus. That's why you needed to liquidate, I said, my voice steady. Merciless. That's why you had to get me out the chief archivist, the only one who would spot the fakes. You had to sell the building and destroy the archives to cover your pathetic desperate crimes. Lies, he roared, lunging for the papers. But Daniel blocked him. These are just notes, fabrications. Are they? I asked. I looked past him, to his daughter, Chloe. Chloe was staring at her father, her face a mask of horrified understanding. She was vain. Yes, she was lazy, but she wasn't a criminal, and she had just realized her father had used her, made her the face of a multi-million-dollar fraud, and was about to leave her holding a bag of debt and criminal charges. The seed I planted had bloomed. Chloe, Marcus begged, turning to her. Tell them she's lying, we're a family. Chloe stood up, her entire body shaking. She looked at me, then at her father. He's not lying, she whispered. After you got that email, she said to me, I got suspicious. You said he thought I was incompetent. Chloe, shut up, Marcus hissed. No, she cried, tears of rage and humiliation streaming down her face. I went to his study. I knew he collected old books. I found them. The fakes. They were hidden in a safe behind his desk. He wasn't collecting them. He was practicing, learning how to make them. Total isolation. The final piece. You used me, she shrieked at her father. You told me I was the new CEO. You were just using me to cover your tracks. As she spoke, the boardroom doors opened again. This time, it was 2 uniformed police officers and a detective in a suit. Marcus Vance, the detective asked, his voice calm. Marcus looked at the door, then at me. The arrogance, the anger, the panic, it all evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, defeated old man. Mr. Vance, you're under arrest for grand larceny, Viere, Fraud, and forgery, the detective said, pulling out handcuffs. As they cuffed him, Marcus stared at me, his eyes full of a venom that no longer had any power. You did this, he spat. You ruined this family. No, Uncle, I said, standing tall. You did. You were just too arrogant to see that my grandfather was smarter than you. You were playing checkers. He was playing chess. They led him out, past his weeping daughter and his stunned, silent wife. The room was quiet. Walter, the board chairman, finally spoke. Miss Vance, Eleanor, it seems we owe you an apology. And congratulations. You are, it appears, our new CEO. I shook my head. No. Vance Publishing, this shell, is finished. I'm letting the bank take the building. As of today, I am the director of the Vance Legacy Trust, and the trust will be forming a new company, a better one. The next 6 months were a blur of hard work, but it was good work. I used the trust's assets, the priceless backlist, to secure funding for a new modern publishing house. I didn't take the old, bloated building. I found a sleek, beautiful new office space downtown. I rehired every employee Marcus had fired, starting with Mary. My father, Marcus, was sentenced to 10 years for fraud and embezzlement. My Aunt Cynthia, facing charges as an accomplice, fled the country. And Chloe surprised me. She testified against her father. She came to me a week after the trial, stripped of her designer clothes and her smugness. I have nothing, she said. You have a chance to build something, I replied. I didn't offer her an executive job. I offered her an unpaid internship in the mailroom, just like I started. I told her. She took it. Today, I sat in my new office, looking out over the city. On my desk, in a place of honor, sat Arthur's old, broken fountain pen. It was a reminder that true value isn't in buildings or bank accounts. It's in legacy. It's in knowledge. My grandfather had faced the ultimate betrayal, but even from beyond the grave, he had orchestrated the most satisfying revenge. He had protected his soul, and he had entrusted it to me. I had not let him down. Have you ever been betrayed by the very people who were supposed to protect you? What does it feel like to have everything stolen, only to find the strength you never knew you had? Share your own stories of resilience and justice in the comments below. If my journey inspired you, please hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories of overcoming the impossible, and share this with anyone who needs to be reminded that even in your darkest hour, you are stronger than you think. Thank you for listening.